Out of the Dead City by Samuel R. Delany, a book review. In short, wow, this was so good. This book was actually selected by my viewers and potentially subscribers out of my ABC, something beginning with D. Samuel R. Delany is, of course, an American author, and he is very influential. Born in 1942, I know I've read a lot of his books in the past, but this is one of the authors that has become increasingly difficult to find, not only in second-hand shops, which are rapidly disappearing, but in new editions. I might have to check out Masterworks if I want any more of his. I only own two. This is the second one, and now I've read both of them. The first one was Babel 17, which there is a review from last year somewhere down in the long list of books that I've read and reviewed. So here I've got this delightful sphere science fiction. I think that's a phenomenally beautiful cover. I think the artwork stands on its own, but is also remarkably relevant in a strange way to the content, in a way that you're not actually going to get until you've read it, I suspect. So it's by Russell Fitzgerald. Love it. This book was published. Oh, there's some quotes in the beginning too. This book was first published in Great Britain in 1968, and though it's a bit difficult to tell, I think this is the 1968 edition. It's also got a list of every single country in which it's been translated and published. There's nearly 50 of them. It's a significant read, but I read it because I was curious. When it comes to Out of the Dead City, it is a little bit hard to find out background about this book. So I fell down an internet rabbit hole on this regard. I didn't know until I was well into it that it was a trilogy, and I was reading it kind of at the same time as Rob from Alspace, so we got to chat about it a little bit. I didn't know that it was a trilogy until I'd started it, and neither did he. It is apparently a trilogy that might be called The Fall of the Towers. It might also be called Captives of the Flame, depending on which internet you happen to be visiting. City of the Dead variously was published individually as Captives of the Flame in 1963, and then rewritten as Out of the Dead City in 1968. There's also, the second one is probably The Towers of Tron, published in 1964, so the year after the first one. And then there was City of a Thousand Suns, published in 1965, so a bit after that. Then everything was edited and reviewed, published in an omnibus, which I've never set eyes on. And then I don't believe that anything in this series hasn't actually been edited significantly from one edition to the other one, which is interesting, and I have no objections to. And apparently in the omnibus, Delany describes the extent of rewriting and possibly the purposes. So there's a lot there to start with. Now, I am not that keen on series. I do a few of them every now and then, but it's not my go-to. I want a novel to stand on its own. I want a book to start at the front cover and end at the back cover. Thank you very much. If you can't do that, I'm afraid that I'm inclined to think you're not as good a writer as you could be. Or at least you're not as good a writer as my tastes call for. Out of the Dead City, in my opinion, stands very nicely as a standalone novel. I think you can read this start to finish and feel satisfied in having read a good story. The story arc completes, the characters do their thing. You put it down with a sense of satisfaction of a book well read. There are a couple of loose elements that are not completely tied off. Sorry. Bird. Come on, bird. Hello, Reapy Cheep. Chirp. She's not paying attention to me. What a terrible person she is. There are a couple of elements in the story that don't tie off. The fate of the Crown Prince, for example. I don't have a problem with that. Nothing in real life is ever completely tied off either. It's just one continual story. And I don't have a problem with that. I love birds. I really do. Whether they love me is a completely different question. So yes, works well as a standalone novel. Do recommend. The writing is spectacular. I made notes. The writing is the spectacular Delany writing, that it builds up all these different scenes around different peoples in a way that is vivid, often uses no unnecessary words, but it isn't straightforward. Well, they're not unnecessary words, it's kind of rich and gothic at times and always very descriptive. Now, I feel that you can tell that this is an earlier novel to Babel 17. I assume it's an earlier novel. Maybe I'm completely wrong. You tell me if I'm wrong. But this feels like an early novel from an author that is already formidable and intellectual and fascinating and immensely skilled, but an earlier novel that is yet to develop. What's it about? Well, good question. For a start, don't believe the internet, because I've read a number of reviews of it now, and many of them are slightly not the way I'd describe them, and some of them are downright wrong. I can't read you anything from Goodreads, because Goodreads is convinced that the only edition of this that exists is in Spanish and refuses to show me English. I do not speak Spanish, that is a problem. Okay, so we start with this really wildly psychedelic scene in which it's the prologue. We start with the prologue, which introduces a few things that you don't understand are being reduced. The first words are the green of beetles' wings, the red of polished carbuncle, a web of silver fire. Lightning tore his eyes apart, struck deep inside his body. And then the next couple of pages, you've got this very writing version of impressionistic painting. Things are happening and they're clearly important and imminently involved in what's happening to our primary character, but we don't really know what. So when I first read it, I found it a confusing, almost shambolic introduction. Our main protagonist's name is John Koshar, but what exactly is happening we don't know, and why it's happening to him we don't know. And I've now gone back and reread that prologue 2 times, and I feel that this was an intentional writing by Delany to put you off guard as to what's happening next. And in hindsight, I like it more than I did the first time I was reading it. I have read a couple of other reviews where they say they never really got past it. I get it. It's worth getting past. So we find that John Koshar is one of 3 men who has been recently a prisoner in mines in this post-apocalyptic future, and we don't realize it's post-apocalyptic initially. That understanding grows on you kind of organically when they talk about the big fire. John Koshar has been one of these prisoners. 3 of them escaped. Prisoners never escape from these mines. They mine something called, I think it's tetron. It's a metal needed by their civilization. Anyone who's convicted is sent to the mines. They don't sound particularly pleasant, but they don't sound like the most appalling mines in the world. Anyway, escapes always fail. John Koshar and 2 compatriots made it as far as the forest, but at the forest, 2 of them continue into the forest and are eventually recovered as bodies by the guards. Something terrible has happened to them, though I don't believe we're ever actually told what the terrible thing was. John Koshar gets turned around and heads toward this other city, which is called, I think, Telephon. All the names begin with T. That's fun. It's not fun. It's not fun if you've got bad memory. Okay, Telfar, the dead city of Telfar. And that's where we kind of skip from John back to the city. And this is spoilers light for the most part. I'll warn you if it isn't. But we find this post-apocalyptic scenario where the mainland has people living on it. There's this ruined city that is full of radiation. It was built by ancestors, but not too far distant ancestors, as a sort of triumph against radiation, but then the radiation overwhelmed it. This is the city toward John Koshar is heading. The majority of the civilization exists on an island, and then you've got the mainland where there's fishing villages and the mines, obviously, and forests full of 2 kinds of people that are not really people. we find out that there's been a great fire, and eventually we connect the dots. We're probably talking about nuclear fire here. And these two forest-dwelling peoples are responsible. This bird fight. No. Oh my God. Whatever. Birds. I was doing so well. I'm going to keep going. Hi, I love birds. Yes. So as a result of this radiation, apparently humanity has diverged a bit. You've got small race of men living in the forest who they do get unfortunately referred to as Neanderthal. That type of reference kind of dates it, and the talk about things as having evolved into the much taller forest-dwelling people who've also got these strange markings on their face, or the smaller Neanderthals. Calling about that evolving or devolving is one of the things that really does date this. But you know, as a 60s book, that those sorts of concepts are very common. Now, the civilization as it stands up is really interesting. You've got a king who lives in a palace. You've got slums that sound very, very medieval. Almost dark ages at time, but you've got this technology like flying spaceships that are capable of bombing the enemy. You've got technology that is incredibly in the future for the 2020s, let alone for the 60s. So there's this silver transport thing that is never incredibly well described, as you can tell, but is fairly central to the story a couple of times in a couple of ways. So we know that it's been manufactured and presumably out of this metal tell stuff that John and his friends have been mining. And after it's been built, people use it to what seems like transport. It seems like a matter transport system. And you can use it to get all the way to the ruined and radiation-full city of Telfon or anywhere else. You've got these crystalline labs. You've got a futuristic education system in which the sciences are very prominent. And people are discovering sciences. There's a fair bit of math in here because our female character is a mathematician doing her postgraduate work at a university. Why didn't she study birds? Birds are great. Come on then. How about a knee? Want to sit somewhere? That's nice and safe. Okay, so where were we? For a small book, and it is fairly modest in page count, 143 pages, Delany packs a lot in. So we've got a lot of the civilization, we've got many different characters doing lots of different things, and we've got lots of backdrops. Now, one of the ones that particularly fascinated me, marine biology background, is that a primary food source for the city is fish. And you've got two types of fish. You've got an economic catastrophe happening in that the fishing villages, from which one of our characters later comes, are fishing hard, and the harder they work, the less they get paid, and their fish often isn't actually sold because at the same time this entrepreneur from the island has developed what sounds like a mariculture or aquaculture system, and so all these fish are produced in plastic tubes and they've cornered the market. Everyone eats these fish. That individual is also a character and the father of two of our main characters, including John Kosher. So there's a lot of characters doing a lot of things, all of which are interesting, and it all fits in remarkably well. Well, you don't want attention. What do you want? I really should just edit all this out, shouldn't I? Nah, too lazy. Now, all of this fits together as well as it does because of the beauty of the writing. The writing is spectacular. Delany clearly had very clear plot lines and their convergence in his head, and they work exceptionally well. I don't actually think I ever was reading here and go, thinking that a part could be cut. It seemed immaculate. And this would be one of the edited ones as well, I imagine. So an example of the writing is we find that John Kosher has made it back to the city using this transport thing. Still, this is spoiler light. And he has gone to a particular ball, which is again introduces us to some very, very central characters to the whole plot. And he is trying to dance with his sister to let her know that he has survived the mines. The quote: "He was dancing with the Duchess. She was nearly his height, and watched him with a smile hung in the subtle area between friendship and knowing cynicism." This is fairly early on in the book, and it's an example of that deft, delicate, and quite beautiful writing that Delany does that is immensely descriptive with just a few words. That sets a scene in one paragraph in a way that some other books take pages to do. Now, what else can I say that isn't really a spoiler? Did I mention this was the something beginning with D? Yes, I did mention that. A very, very excellent pick, this book. I am delighted to have read it. Now, there's one thing about the end, still spoiler light. It ends in this journey through dimensions. And I don't think everyone's going to love this. I think some of the quotes actively say they disliked it. But I really sunk into the novel by then, and I was enjoying it. It reminded me of various universe quests that I've read in other books, and I loved these deft pickings of different societies and different alien species and different alien environments. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. And the end was subtly satisfying. I think you could consider it to be basically setting the scene for the lead on to the next book, but for myself, I found it satisfying. Okay, now let's spoiler it a bit. So if you haven't read this book, at 17 minutes, by all means, go find yourself a copy and go read it, because it's really good. It's well worth it. You need to read good books. We all know this. This is a good book. Go read good books. Spoilers. I imagine that there are some other people out there who have read it, because Delany is quite a famous author. I imagine there's a few people who don't plan to. We all have reading schedules. I do understand. So some of the things about John Kosher. John Kosher comes out of the radiation city with this weird capacity to be visible or invisible, and it's got to do with his refraction. In the city, he is changed by the main motivator of this whole plot. So the whole plot is actually, and including the dimensional timey-wimey stuff, is due to the fact that there is this great war happening in the background. So we've got the war that this city is about to initiate against person or persons unknown outside the radiation zone, who have apparently been shooting down ships, so they must be the enemy. Who exactly is declaring this war, we don't really know. That might come in later books, I'm not sure. But the king is basically a figurehead. And we have no idea who's really running this government at all. It certainly isn't the most rich and powerful. It may be his counselor. We're not sure. That's never given to us. I don't even know if that's important. At the same time, there's this universe-wide war being waged between two different forces. And one of these forces has grabbed John, led him into the radiation land, and reformed his body so that the radiation won't kill him. As a part of that, his refractive index has changed, so at times, if there isn't enough light, he becomes essentially invisible. In this invisible stage, he comes back to his city using this mass transporter Silver Thread. He talks to the king, who he blames for having been sent off to the penal mines. Not unjustly, as it happens. The two of them were schoolboys together. They did a prank. He ended up in prison. The king did nothing. The king, we get the sense, can't do anything anyway. He's very young. He's completely controlled. Has very little autonomy, if any. John then goes back to his old home. His father is the mass marketer of mariculture fish, aquaculture fish, and his sister is the mathematician who becomes one of the key characters. We find that John has something riding in the back of his head, and I really like that way, the way it was done here. He feels that he wasn't free because he was incarcerated in the mines, and now he's not free because he's got this rider in his head who never really explains anything to him, only that they're fighting a war. Now, this rider is from a species or race, and I use that term very loosely, which can control up to 3 people at a time. John is one. He knows he's looking for 2 more. When all 3 come together, they will be able to pinpoint this race's opponent, who they're calling Lord of the Flames. Lord of the Flames is apparently responsible for the radiation, and they feel that if the radiation goes away and there's no one on the other side of it, then maybe their culture won't go to war. That is the motivation of the Duchess, who is also one of the people being ridden by this mysterious entity. So there are a lot of plots, and they all progress organically and side by side. We've got some fantastic characters. One of my favorites, I think, was Alta. She's a young street girl who has been taken in by her aunt, whose name is something beginning with Rara. Rara's basically a professional beggar in the slum area, and she's taken in Alta, who's helping her make whatever coins they can, doing whatever they can, which is often not terribly moral. I don't know about legal. Legal seems to be up in the air with them. So Alta falls in with a young man called Tell, who's just come from the fishing communities, and she starts teaching him the gymnastics that she knows, and that becomes the first port of call when the crown prince is stolen or kidnapped from the main castle. That ties in with the rest of the plot in a way that is really fascinating and really enjoyable to read. I love the descriptions of Alta and her attempts to teach the other 2 young boys rudimentary acrobatic skills. And I loved the way they were incorporated into that final quest. I could definitely read more of them, and so if I did find the rest of this trilogy, I would definitely read on to see what becomes of them. At this point, well, I'm going to talk a bit more about the Vision Quest. Now, there's a Mercedes Lackey book called Sacred Ground, in which people are chasing the enemy, a vile, dark enemy who wants to destroy the land. And in order to do that, they jump through a whole heap of different universes, assuming a character, animal, whatever, from that universe at the time. Love that book. And that is essentially what happens here. But here it's much more complex and much more evolved. So the 3 main protagonists who are being used, they haven't really been taken over. They still have a lot of autonomy by this species, race, whatever it is, intergalactic Grand Fubar. They are chasing the Lord of the Flames through all these spots. But Alta and Tell are riding in the head of one of them. So it's actually this group that are chasing him. And it's quite fascinating. They go through 2 or 3 alien species, one of it which is an aquatic gill-bearing under the ocean one. And while they're in these, what are they? Carriers? Riders? I don't know. They both have the feelings of their own self. So John knows he's John and what he's doing, but he also has the knowledge and the goals of the character he's riding, who is a young boy who almost drowns. They go through some fascinating one. One is the surface of the sun, and we're actually talking in integers. That one was challenging, but I got through it. So yeah, that is a spoiler, but despite being a spoiler, reading it is completely different to hearing me waffle on about it. So I do thoroughly recommend this book, even if you've sat through all the spoilers and you think you know what's going to happen. You may know as a broad sense, but the experience will be completely different. So I recommend you now go away and read good books. And Out of the Dead City, definitely a good book, definitely worth reading. Thank you for watching very much.